Welcome to the live information stream. Sonic beam straight through the dream all the way to the screen in loops, circles like this from out there beyond that shit and straight to my brain and out my mouth. This is the welcoming bell. I am here with information about all things relevant and esoteric to life. I'm like a snake oil salesman with a pouch full of ash, and I'm here to tell you that there's patterns in the ash and that it's magic. So, first, I want to talk about death. What is death on a cosmic scale? What does it mean that something that we know exists for a period of about 10 million years, or you could even say 100, follows this process where it seems like it's moving around and doing shit with its physical body, and then that ends. And this is a paradigm that we call life and death, something that has shown up on planet Earth sometime within the past billion or 2 years. What does this say about the universe itself, though? Does it say anything at all? Death is a transformative process that's easier to see than a baby going from 4 limbs crawling forward to standing upright, tall, and seeing over top of things. This is a representation of successant dimensionality. Everything is an example of encompassing dimensionalities. And that really is the key to knowing. All this time, people search for meaning. They search for a way out of boring life, or they search for something beyond, something spiritual. And there are keys that lie within everything that exists that unlock doors to higher dimensionalities. For example, geometry. If you look at a system of multiplanar, basically vectors is what you would call them or consider them to be. And then all of these vectors have different properties, but the whole system displays a property that none of the individual parts have. And this property is based on those pieces coming together to make a whole. And so in geometry, it's easy to explain higher dimensionalities. And that happens to be one of the ways that people experience them in DMT states and psychedelic states. They see these geometric patterns that unfold in weird ways and are strange and connect. So I think, as random as it is that we are here on this planet doing God knows what, with walking, talking capabilities and different animals, and it's all so novel. Like, no, it should just be a grid of energy with equidistant points that are transferring information. Like, why should a leaf exist? Everything is off kilter, such to the point where things are this way. And I believe that that is uh, based on our positioning in the infinite cosmos, or the infinite state of infinite states. As in, right now, antimatter wins. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. Maybe not always, though. You see what I'm saying? Matter usurps antimatter for some reason, and things exist. It doesn't cancel itself out. Even though for a matter particle to be created, antimatter has to do the same thing. So the imbalance, or the Hubble tension, is the source of the structural foundation of all things that exist in this universe. You know? I mean, the fact that everything's a little not perfect, from planets to the way things taste when you don't put the right spices in them. You know what I mean? Like, that's just the way things are right now. But as the system is infinite, we will eventually end up in a place where five dimensionality is a common thing. As in, people will start seeing these shapes and colors and have communication with higher dimensional beings. And it's just a result of the motion of reality. It's like unfolding itself from the outside, the inside becomes the outside. If you know what a toroid is, you might be keen to this idea. But the idea is that at the center of this toroid, which happened 14 billion years ago, things were congealed and one and dense and in a state of, bliss. And then for whatever happened, it started moving towards where we are now. And this state, everything is spread out. There's empty space between all the things that finally cooled off enough and had enough stability to form molecules and planets and shit. So you see, it goes from this dense to this open, spacious thing, and then people start having these out of body experiences and stuff, and these connections with deities, and you think that it has to be coming from the other side of the center. We're not at the center anymore. We're 14 billion years towards the rim of this hypersphere that has chi flowing, connecting the outside with the inside in all directions. And so the laws of physics might change. I'm here to talk about all things esoteric. So if anybody's watching and they comment something they want to know about, let me know. I don't know. So there's this wheel. It turns and it turns and it gathers moss. But it turns forever, as there's nothing to stop it. But the more it goes, the more moss it gathers, till eventually the moss comes alive, starts living on the surface of the stone. And that's where we are right now as human beings. We are on the surface of a geometrically incomprehensible pattern that reflects itself in infinite ways, known as everyday life, everyday objects in life, everyday circumstances. It's playing out its own symphony before your very eyes. I think the welcome bell frightened my cat as he jumped up from his spot when I rang it and fled. You can see the pattern in certain things more easily, certain number sequences, certain refractions of light. And, you know, you can. So when you understand that that's what it is, though, your mind becomes aware of things and that it is the source of those things and that, it's infinite and it's you. It's the observer, really. And what it does is it hides itself, it encodes itself, it replicates itself, and it transforms itself in ways that create universes. So this universe might be a toroid, but who's to say what the next one over is? Might be a triangle. But it's the one thing that exists, and you would not say that you don't exist, no? Who here would say that they don't exist? No. You have things like Indra's net, which is a cool concept, spaced out reflections of each other. You have things like the Cartesian theater, which I basically co opted this idea and relabeled my own with this phrase. But what it is that it's the dance that the dead, you procession of the dead, essentially. And it takes place in the circus that is just beyond light. And so now it moves around because if you move forward, it goes backwards. If you look for it, it's hard to find. But in the right state of mind, you can hear somebody on the other side of this reality, saying, oh, he's aware of us. He can hear us. Why isn't he in the show? Stuff like that. And then you see these colors, these like neon colors. But it's the idea that believing that this energy here is a place is a facet of human psychology. And the idea of the place is nothing. The idea of the place is electrons and mass that has enough space around it that you can move from one spot to another spot. The illusion of place lies between the third dimension and the fourth dimension of time, where you can't be here now and then there now. If you go later, then you won't be there now. You'll be here, and then when you get there, it will be later. You know what I mean? That's all. That's all that it means to travel through space. Is to change the coordinate really on the time. And I don't know. It's hard to kind of explain that concept, but in a sense, you can imagine that everything exists like as photocopied layers on top of each other, stacked out, and that the four dimensionality of the parameters of each of these photocopies that equal up to what we experience every day um, create like a gestalt that when a individual observer observes itself in this form, you know, space and time become an inherent part of the processing of the energy. It's like encoded within the human DNA or the brain or something, the psyche maybe, to perceive things as separate. This could be a mechanism of psychology, of the brain, or some evolutionary thing. But things could be stacked on top of each other, somewhere in a pool hall on the other side of Planet X. You know what I mean? It doesn't have to be such because all that really has to do is whether they're bound to the same speed of light cone and their affectability with each other. And that light cone is where we're stuck at, but we're headed towards the outside of it. And that's where the fifth dimensional stuff lies. And, you know, that's where the DMT experience lies, and that's what the after death experience does. And it really is just more noticeable because you lose control of this bones. You can't walk around, the body decomposes and stuff. And so it's like you don't exist at the focal point anymore. You're now in concentric circle number one. And I don't know really what lies beyond any of that stuff, but I assume that with infinite possibility, that, any idea of a self that would be constructed would, certainly become aware of the fact that it never ends. And I think that's what happens with a lot of people is they just become connected with it's, oh yeah, haha, like infinity is all that exists. And so, maybe like 1,000 different lifetimes go by, and then it becomes changes so much that it's just a story that you see in the woodwork. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. Certain people believe that you can have seals with symbols that, are like portals, and you can bring in things from the other side of the divide due to the physical body being on the planet that is somewhere near the center of the universe in regards to how many years are probably going to go by in this alignment. I mean, 14 billion years, that could be half of the universal lifetime. It could, it's what some scientists have used. But here's the thing, you can't use Newtonian directionality and kinetic energy as a cosmic model because everything that happens is not coming from an explosion that happened at the beginning of quote unquote time. The Big Bang is nonsense. Um, the phase change between the center of the universe and where we are now certainly, involves cosmic inflation potentially. But these are things that are explaining away problems that people from within the paradigm are viewing. First of all, second of all, it goes much deeper than that because, you know, the mechanics of what would be considered an explosion um, just dictate that you have separate objects moving towards or away from each other relatively to each other. within this system. But the thing is, it's not objects within a system, though. It's fields. It's fields that behave in ways that give rise to the illusion of particles. But this illusion is so convincing that these particles can actually interact, and it's really just a third level. You have the root, the foundational field. You have its interactions of self that give rise to these, and then you have those level interactions that give rise to third level things. Everything that exists in the baryonic world can be reduced to a field. You know what I'm saying? And so uh you have to not look at it as a reverse engineerable explosion. You know, speaking of like cosmic time, 14 billion years could be absolutely not even giving us information about how long it would last. Because tomorrow, you know, all this shit could be sucked up into a hypercube. We don't know because the things that actually determine what happens in the physical world don't come from the physical world. What I'm saying is the transition from the center of the universe, which is what people call pre-inflationary Big Bang, it's really just the center of the universe. And we're like here, 14 billion years going towards the outside of this container. And it's shifting in its own pattern, but that shifting gives rise to patterns that we see, like orbit of planets, the way that leaves grow, you know, stuff like that. Basically, to take you all the way through it, you know, when you observe something, you affect it. And this is the law of universe, at least right now. When you take your relationship with reality through the gates of death, you know what I'm saying? It doesn't change. It doesn't change. For anything to exist, an observer must be present. This is a fundamental law of quantum physics. And therefore, the substrate that gives rise to fields is consciousness. That's what I'm trying to say. And that's what some people are trying to prove. And look up Andres Gomez Emilson because he's one of the lead psychedelic researchers at the Qualia Research Institute, and he has lots of really good information about altered states of consciousness and like numerology and like really just deep brain patterns and like different things over on his channel. Um, but that's basically, it goes like this. You have a zero-dimensional point, and then you have a line, and then you have, you know, a two-dimensional circle, but then it turns itself into a sphere. And so the sphere comes right before where we are now because time is dimension number 4. And that's what turns the sphere geometrically into a hypersphere. So when I say toroid, I'm talking about a hypersphere, and this is the shape that the chakras are supposedly taking form in. The energy centers in the bodies are allegedly, you know, toroidal in nature. And so, yeah, I'm talking about space a little bit like astrology. And as in the effects that, you know, the alignment, and that's just Newtonian physics. That's just relativity. That's things that are within observability. You can go out and look at the constellations, and that's how they did, and that's where they derived a lot of the mathematics that govern, you know, how today they look at certain things. They looked at, you know, the certain orbits, and then they calculated like how many degrees it was until this alignment was going to happen. And yeah, I don't know about like specific people though and their lives and how it's affected by astrology. I just know that it's a fundamental connection, I think, that people have to the stars. And I think that, how it works for you is how it works for you. And how it works for me is how it works for me. But you know, people have similar personality traits among different circles. You get basically reiterations of the same character. I don't know if anybody else has noticed this, but I've noticed that, oh, I go to this side of town and go to this specific restaurant. I'm going to see a group of people, and there's one of each in every group. You know what I mean? And it's just everyone's a little bit different, but most people's personalities fit into like one of these categories. So if you like hearing about this kind of random stuff, I have a lot of videos on my channel where I just am talking about what I believe is the way that reality works. And I would never tell you anything I didn't think was true. So I take a lot from Terence McKenna, and I take a lot from people like Stephen Lahar. One of the biggest influences is Rupert Sheldrake. He's a guy, and Federico Fagin is another guy I'm into. And basically, I'm coming up with this model where consciousness is the substrate of reality. And right now, it seems to be behaving in such a way that gives a rise to fields like the quark field, the electromagnetic field, and so forth. And anything that happens in life is just some combination of interactions between these fields. And the proof is in music theory. When you have a wave like this, and then you add a wave that's twice as fast, has twice a high frequency, each two times this one goes by, it's going to line up with the other one. And that's going to create a harmonic because of the energy. It's going to need a way to propagate in space. And because they're lining up, they gain each other's energy. And that's what an octave is. And there's a whole harmonic scale that functions on this principle, but that's the way that it functions for me. And so then it's like concentric circles of a bullseye, and it just goes on infinitely, like ripples, in a pond or something. Being an astronaut would be so cool. I hope that you get to do that. Yeah, it's never too late because you can be like 40, 50, 60 years old. I don't know, you might be 70, but it's going to be a lot easier to go to space, especially if you have enough money. You're going to be able to go um, commercially, they say, probably within the next 50 years. They'll be taken, and I think they already can take some people to space, even if they're not astronauts. But yeah, yeah, I hope you get to do that. And God is real. Yeah, God to me is real. I'm glad because to me, knowing that something else beyond me is there, living, alive, and all knowing, it's just comforting. And it makes sense because I didn't design any of this, I'm just one guy. Well, I appreciate you. Thanks for stopping by the live information stream, Sonic Beam from the Dream, as I called it in the beginning. And take care, everyone. And see you later.